This is the Mi-24P HFS 80, also designated as the Hind F. This is the gunship variant from the Hind series of helicopters, with the main difference being the replacement of the Yak-B turret for a fixed GSH 30mm cannon, which is mounted to the side of the fuselage. In this case, this Mi-24P represents a Hind after the reunification of Germany from the Heersfliegerstaffel 80, specifically airframe 9645, which was previously registered as number 422 while in East German service. In fact, this airframe was later sold to the Hungarians and was registered as 335, and as far as I can find, this particular aircraft is actually still flying as of 2019. In-game, this is a Tier 6 premium helicopter on the German helicopter line, which will cost you 8,730 Golden Eagles to purchase. Aside from the paint scheme, this is in fact identical to both the Russian and the German Mi-24Ps in their tech trees, which is something that could put some people off of buying this vehicle, although buying it purely for grinding is still a perfectly fair reason to get it. So now getting into the weapons of the Mi-24P, starting off with your fixed weapon, a 30mm GSH 32K cannon. This has no traverse and is fixed to the right side of the nose and can take either default, universal, ground targets or air target belts. The gun can be switched into either low or high rate of fire modes, with the best rate of fire being 2,598 rounds per minute, while you hold 250 rounds of ammunition. Of course, that's not the only weapon you get. You do also have multiple weapon types that can be mounted on your pylons. These consist of either Sturm ATGMs, R60 and R60M air-to-air missiles, S8 KO rockets, and dual 23mm cannon pods. You do also have the opportunity to use 250 or 500 kilogram bombs, but they have very limited usage. Firstly, let's focus on the Sturm ATGMs. Now you can have up to 4 of these, but they only have 560mm of best effective pen, which is not exactly great when compared to most other ATGMs on similar helicopters. Although on the other hand, you do have a range of 5,000 meters and a velocity of 400 meters per second, which does help to make them a little bit more effective. Of course, you also have air-to-air capability in the form of the R60 and the R60M missiles, and in this case we're going to look at the best of the two, the R60M. This missile has a good G overload of 20G, but is majorly inferior to later gen missiles such as the Mistral in basically every regard. It has a speed of 800 meters per second, and it also is affected by IRCM units, which later gen missiles are not affected by. So this will prove to be much worse in helicopter battles than missiles such as the Mistral, but in ground battles it still works a treat against most aircraft thanks to their lack of countermeasures. Final weapon worth talking about are the S8 KO rockets. These are unguided and travel at a speed of 610 meters per second with 400mm of best effective pen and contain 1.1 kilograms of explosive filler. I wouldn't really advise using these in ground battles, but in helicopter battles they can be rather useful for ground pounding and taking out pillboxes and medium tanks. The Hind itself is a big helicopter powered by 2 turboshaft engines. It does have a good top speed in a straight line of 203 miles an hour on the stat card, but when it comes to agility, the Hind is not exactly the best, so avoiding close fighting with other helicopters would be a wise choice. It does also feature some armor around the cockpit and engine sections, although in most cases this has minimal effect against enemy fire. The Mi-24P does feature night vision but does not get a thermal sight, and it is also equipped with flares, an IRCM unit, and exhaust suppression system. And finally, it does of course also get a radar warning receiver system. Getting into the game modes, there are 2 that this helicopter can be used in, either ground, RB, and simulator, or in helicopter battles. In this video we're going to be looking at ground RB and helicopter battles, starting off with ground RB. So as we get into our first game, it is worth saying that I did not really find much success using the Mi-24P as an air-to-ground helicopter. I found much more success using it to take out enemy air units, be that helicopters or aircraft. As you've just seen, took out a Eurocopter Tiger using one of my Sturm ATGMs. Of course, you can kill helis with ATGMs, they're not exactly that fast, and if you can sort of master leading the ATGM to hit the enemy helicopter, it is a relatively easy thing to pull off. I'm now using an R60M missile to try and take out an IL-28 bomber, take him out, and that is one less thing for the friendlies on the ground to worry about. Of course, one problem with trying to use air-to-air missiles while flying at low level is sometimes they might not reach the target. Of course, there are trees and there are hills that it may hit, as you are about to see. Boom, the missile hit the ground, and now I have to resort to using the 30mm cannon to attempt to take out an enemy bomber, who is coming towards me and is shooting at me, and somehow I don't die, despite his shots almost hitting me, him dropping a bunch of bombs, and me flying through a bunch of trees. So, fairly lucky I got off in one piece there. Now this is one issue that all of the hinds have. After a quick maneuver, going to a high collective pitch value will lead to your RPM dropping off very quickly and you falling out of the sky. One piece of advice for that is always have your gear down at low level so that you can use that as a crumple zone, and then also if you're doing a quick maneuver, make sure to have your collective pitch at sort of 50-60% and your RPM should stay relatively stable. So in this game, I am actually going for an enemy tank with the Sturm ATGM, and you're probably wondering why I went for a more air-to-air standpoint rather than air-to-ground, and really it's just that I don't find them to be the most effective. Occasionally you will get one-shot kills against sort of tanks with lower survivability, but in most cases you'll hit an enemy vehicle and it'll just do some splash damage, and it will take a few ATGMs to take them out. And you only carry 4 of them, which is considerably less than the G-Lynx and the Eurocopter Tiger HAP, the other tier 6 premiums at the current time, which each have 8 ATGMs. So really I found an air-to-air sort of playstyle is quite a bit better for earning RP and Silver Lions. As you saw, I took out an Mi-24D who was attacking the friendly heli-spawn, and I just shot down a MiG-17 using the R60 air-to-air missile. Now we see an Mi-4 who is spamming rockets at friendly tanks on the ground. I decide to use the Sturm ATGM, fire it off, and luckily he's a fairly slow big target, solid hit into the side, that's him taken down. After that point I didn't have much to do, I saw a Huey flying off, and eventually he came back towards the battlefield, allowing me to move in, get an ATGM on track, and get a solid hit into the underside of his helicopter, and that was him down. So to sum up ground battles for this heli, air-to-air performance is great. Your R60M missiles will in most cases have minimal issues dealing with enemy aircraft, and for taking down enemy helis, of course, you could use the R60s or the Sturms, and in some cases actually, as seen with that IL-28 in the first game, your gun can come in handy if the AAMs or the ATGMs fail to work for whatever reason. Staying low and avoiding enemy anti-aircraft vehicles is vital in this game mode at this kind of BR, and the radar warning system is hugely useful for doing that, allowing you to know as soon as you are in the radar sight of an enemy vehicle. Of course, some SAM launchers such as the Stormer will not show up on this warning system, but then again, just generally staying low with hard cover between you and the enemy vehicles will easily solve that problem. In whole, the ATGMs themselves are somewhat effective. 560mm of pen is usable, and their 5km range is definitely quite good for keeping yourself out of enemy fire, but the lack of them is what I don't like. You can only carry 4 of them, and that's what I really dislike. I would personally gander that the Mi-24V is much more effective at ground attack in this mode, due to the fact that it can carry 8 of these Sturm ATGMs, allowing for a few ATGMs per target without having to go back to base after only 1 or 2 kills. So now moving over into helicopter EC, I would dare say that the Mi-24P is a competitive helicopter in this mode, but it certainly isn't an easy time when facing helicopters such as the Eurocopter Tiger and the Viper. Now, your missiles first off lock at a much shorter range than most of the later generation air-to-air missiles you will see, such as the Mistrals, the Stingers and the Iglers, so you generally will have to be much closer and at much more risk of being shot down as you're trying to lock onto some enemy helicopters. The R60s are also affected by IRCM devices, unlike most later missiles, meaning that locking onto some helicopters such as the AH-1F and most of the Mi-24 variants is essentially impossible. Of course, another weapon you're likely to use quite a bit is your gun, and as I said, it is a fixed gun, and the Hind is not exactly an agile helicopter, so getting that gun aimed up onto a target can take a while, and is usually something that will put you at a major disadvantage when fighting other helicopters, especially if the other helicopters have a traversable gun in a turret. They'll be able to get that on target a lot quicker than you can get your gun on. On the other hand though, if you can actually hit them, it is highly likely you will destroy their helicopter or at least do some major damage. Personally though, I prefer to use the ATGMs majority of the time due to their nice 5,000 meter range. This allows you to engage from well out of enemy air-to-air missile range, which is actually quite useful when considering just how many people rely solely on their air-to-air missiles. After a bit of practice, it's usually relatively easy to take down enemy helicopters using ATGMs, especially the Sturms, which not only have a nice range, but also go at 400 meters per second, which is a relatively good velocity for an ATGM. Of course though, you only have 4 of these, so you will need to use them sparingly, and select targets that it is likely the R60s will not be able to deal with. Survivability is of course another thing that should be considered. Of course, if you are hit by any form of missile, that will kill you, but the Hind can actually take some gunfire and still be usable. For example, in the example you're about to see, I shoot down 2 enemy helicopters, and I get set on fire and take critical damage. I lose one of my engines, and the other engine is damaged. Although, I am still able to maintain just enough power on that still running engine to actually take the heli back to base. This is an advantage of the Hind having 2 engines, where even if one of them is damaged, and that's the only one you have operational, on some maps you can still hop it back to the base, or in some cases fly relatively slowly and fly the thing back to base. But in general, the main point of this is that you can take some hits, it can take a relatively hard beating, and still remain usable, although of course every so often you will see a sort of dumb situation where a minor amount of enemy fire will take down your entire helicopter. One last thing to mention for survivability in this mode are the infrared countermeasures. Of course, as said previously, you do have an exhaust suppression system and you have an IRCM device, but then again, most later generation missiles are not affected by these 2 countermeasures, so in those cases you're going to have to be relying on your flares. Now you have 192 flares, which is more than enough to deal with multiple missiles, and really the best bet is when you see the missile warning or you see the missile itself coming towards you, spam off a bunch of flares, turn away from the flares, and hopefully the missile will pick them rather than you. Now of course, talking about EC, I've mostly spoken about attacking enemy helis using the air-to-air missiles, the ATGMs, the gun, but one other thing you can do is of course ground pounding. What can you do there? Well, you can use the S8KO rockets. You can use them, they will take out pillboxes, medium tanks. If you so wish, you can also use them to take out artillery guns, AA guns, trucks, all that kind of stuff. You can easily take them out with. You can also go for enemy bases, although then again, there's not exactly a huge reward for taking out enemy bases in helicopter battles, so personally I wouldn't bother. Your gun can also be used to take out pillboxes or lighter targets. It can kill medium tanks, but generally it takes quite a lot to kill them, and it's a bit inconsistent, but also you only have 250 rounds of ammunition, so I would also advise, if you are ground pounding with the gun, switch it over into the low rate of fire so you don't waste a bunch of your ammo. Well, there we go, the Mi-24P HFS 80. One big question a lot of people will want to know the answer to is it as good as the other tier 6 premiums, the Tiger Hap and G-Lynx? I would say that's a solid no. They are much better, much higher performing than this. They essentially have the power level of a tier 7. This, on the other hand, is just a tier 6. It has far less advanced missiles. The ATGMs, while having much longer range, do have much less pen and general effectiveness than the missiles on G-Lynx and the Tiger. Another thing people want to know probably is, do I get this or do I get the Bo 105 CB2? What I would say to that is, if you already own the Bo 105 CB2, you have no reason whatsoever to buy this helicopter, maybe aside from the Mi-24 having slightly better research efficiency. But aside from that, I wouldn't say there's a major reason to get this over the 105. Of course, this does get the air-to-air missiles, and they are fairly effective, but the 105 itself can also be effective if played correctly. Personally, I have the Mi-24 on a test drive at the moment, and once that expires, I will not be buying it to grind out the German helis that I don't have. I already own the Bo 105, and simply I see no reason not to just use the 105 to grind out the remaining helis on the tech tree. Aside from that though, if you don't own the Bo 105, it is probably worth getting this due to the slightly higher research efficiency, and the fact that you can have the countermeasures while also maintaining essentially 8 weapons, 8 missiles that can be used for air-to-air, whereas with the Bo 105 you only have 4 missiles and you have to install a gun pod to be able to use flares. On the whole though, this is a decent helicopter, although it is far from being the best, and it is certainly far from being the best premium, but if you wish to grind the German helicopter tree, it is definitely your best bet at the current time. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, please consider dropping a like, maybe even subscribe to the channel. If you do, that would be massively appreciated. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.